water came in fast. That was the thing nobody told you about flash floods. Not the volume of it, but the speed, the way it moved with intention, the way it found every low place and filled it before you had time to understand what was happening. Declan Foss had been driving the county road back from the Millhaven Equipment Depot when the Sully Creek Bridge gave. Not the whole bridge. Just the eastern guardrail and 6 feet of concrete deck on the downstream side, which was enough. His truck went sideways into the current before he got the door open. He pulled himself out through the window and caught the bridge support and held there, water up to his chest, the cold of it so complete it felt like pressure rather than temperature. He heard her before he saw her. A sound from the drainage culvert running beneath the road embankment, something between a cough and a voice, and then a hand, pale and flat against the concrete lip of the culvert opening. He let go of the bridge support and moved through the current. Later he would not be able to explain exactly how he crossed that distance without losing his footing. The water was moving at a speed that didn't belong in a place like Harlan County, Kentucky in October, and the gravel under his boots shifted with every step. But he moved and he got there and he reached into the culvert opening and pulled the woman free. She was conscious. That surprised him. She was holding a laptop bag above her head, with one arm the way people instinctively protect the things they carried when everything else was going wrong. Her left leg was wrong at the knee. He could see it without looking directly at it. He carried her to the road embankment, got her up onto the asphalt, and laid her flat. He took off his jacket and put it under her head. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't fear exactly, more like the expression of someone recalculating a situation that had changed faster than expected. "Your leg," he said. "I know," she said. "Don't touch it." He didn't. The ambulance took 40 minutes. He stayed until it arrived, sat on the wet asphalt beside her in the rain, and when the paramedics came, he stepped back and gave them room and answered their questions, and then walked to what remained of his truck, which had lodged against a concrete pillar 30 yards downstream, and sat on the hood and looked at the water until his hands stopped shaking. His name was in the county incident report, listed as a civilian who had assisted at the scene. Nobody called him. Nobody followed up. He hadn't expected them to. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday he was back on the job, which in Declan's case meant driving a county road crew truck and running asphalt repairs on the stretch of State Route 421 that had been flagged since July. His left shoulder ached from the current. He didn't mention it. His foreman, a quiet man named Alfie who had been running road crews in Harlan County for 19 years, looked at the way Declan held his arm and didn't ask. He had a son, 8 years old, named Theo. Theo was staying with Declan's mother in Closplant while the rental situation sorted itself out, which was a sentence Declan had been saying internally for 4 months. The rental situation was a foreclosure notice from Consolidated Appalachian Lending, a regional bank that had acquired his original mortgage lender in 2021 and immediately reclassified a set of adjustable terms that Declan had negotiated in writing with the previous institution. The reclassification was, according to the housing counselor he'd driven to Lexington to see, legally murky. She had used the phrase aggressively creative. She had also told him that fighting it would require a real estate attorney, and that retainer costs in Fayette County ran between $10,000 and $15,000. He drove home that evening to the house on Sycamore Fork Road, which was technically still his house, and made dinner for one, which was the arrangement on weekdays. Theo came on weekends. The house was a 3-bedroom with a back porch that looked out over a ridge of white oaks and a creek that in dry months was almost pretty. He had bought it with his wife Claudine 6 years ago. Claudine had been dead for 2 years, 11 months, and some number of days that he had stopped counting because it hadn't helped to count. The second foreclosure notice was on the kitchen table when he got home. He read it under the overhead light, refolded it, put it with the others in the drawer beside the stove. He made eggs. He ate them standing at the counter. He didn't think about the woman he had pulled from the culvert because the paramedic had said she was stable, and there was nothing more useful to do with that information. In a hospital room at Baptist Health Corbin, 61 miles northwest, a woman named Sarah Voss lay in a bed with her left leg in an external fixator and her laptop open on the tray table. The orthopedic surgeon had told her the tibial plateau fracture was manageable but would require 8 weeks non-weight bearing. She had thanked him and asked whether the hospital had reliable Wi-Fi. He had looked at her the way people sometimes looked at her, like he was revising his initial assessment, and told her she could ask the nurses. The Wi-Fi was adequate. Her assistant, a methodical woman named Priya, who had worked for her for 9 years, called every morning at 8. On the third morning, Sarah interrupted her before she got to the agenda. "The man who pulled me out of the culvert," she said. "Find him." Priya didn't ask for more description. She had learned that Sarah's requests came fully formed, and that asking clarifying questions was usually slower than doing the work. She called back in 4 hours. "Declan Foss," Priya said, 39, Harlan County road crew, going on 6 years. Before that, structural hydrology with the Army Corps of Engineers, Ohio River Division. 8 years. He left in 2019. Sarah waited. "There's something you should know about why he left," Priya said. Her voice had shifted slightly in the way it did when she was getting to a part she thought mattered. The Corps was evaluating a set of drainage infrastructure upgrades for secondary creek systems in eastern Kentucky. Standard federal state cost-share program. Foss filed an internal technical objection to the load modeling on the Sully Creek culvert network. He said the culvert diameter specifications in the 2018 upgrade plan were insufficient for projected rainfall events under updated NOAA climate models. The objection was reviewed and set aside. The engineering director cited budget constraints and the project timeline. When did he leave? His resignation is dated March 2019. The upgraded culverts were installed that summer based on the original specifications he'd objected to. Sarah looked at her leg. The fixator was a mechanical thing, all pins and carbon rods, and it held her leg in a geometry that was strange to look at, but didn't hurt as much as she'd expected. "The culvert I was in," she said. "Part of the 2018 network," Priya said. "Yes." Hadn't saw anything for a moment. Outside the hospital window, October was doing what it did in eastern Kentucky, going golden brown and a little melancholy along the ridgelines. "What's his situation?" Priya told her about consolidated Appalachian lending. She told her about the foreclosure timeline, the interest rate reclassification, the notice that had gone out in August and the second one in October. She told her about the housing counselor in Lexington and the figure she had quoted for legal representation. "Send me the full file," Sarah said. Priya sent it. Sawyer read it until 11 that night, which was how she handled most things that mattered, by reading until she understood the load-bearing part. Consolidated Appalachian Lending had $280 million in assets and a loan portfolio that had been aggressively restructured after the 2021 acquisition of 4 smaller regional institutions. Sada read through 3 years of SEC filings and 1 commercial real estate prospectus from a Lexington development group called Ridgemount Partners, which had submitted a preliminary proposal to Harlan County's Planning Commission for a mixed-use commercial corridor along the eastern county roads. The eastern county roads included Sycamore Fork. The acceleration clauses in the reclassified mortgages, 11 of them all on properties within a quarter mile of the proposed corridor, were technically enforceable under the new terms. They were also, Sarah noted, applied selectively. Consolidated had not triggered acceleration on comparable loans outside the corridor zone in the same period. She closed the laptop at midnight. She looked at her leg for a while. Then she looked at the ceiling. She was not a sentimental person, and she knew herself well enough to know that the feeling she was sitting with was not sentiment. It was something more structural. The man who had pulled her from a drainage culvert had designed the specifications that would have made that culvert survivable. He had tried to say so to the people who could have done something about it. They had filed his objection and built the wrong thing anyway, and now a lending institution was using a document that didn't say what they claimed it said to take his house. She opened the laptop again. Declan was replacing a section of blown culvert pipe on the south end of Bloodsoe Creek Road when the call came in. He stepped out of the drainage ditch, looked at the screen. A 502 area code, Louisville. He answered. "Mr. Foss." A woman's voice, clear and even. "My name is Sarah Voss. You pulled me out of a culvert last Tuesday. I'm told you're a difficult person to locate." He looked at the water draining from his boots onto the road surface. "How did you find me?" he said. "Public records and a capable assistant. I wanted to know whether you were all right." I'm fine. Your shoulder. He shifted the phone, the left one. How do you know about my shoulder? The paramedics report mentioned you declined evaluation. You were favoring it in the security footage from the county incident summary. He was quiet for a moment. I'm fine, he said again. I also wanted to tell you something about your mortgage. The silence that followed was not comfortable. He had not told anyone about the foreclosure, not directly. His mother knew, in the way mothers knew things they hadn't been told. Alvy might have guessed, nobody else. Pennsylvania banking code doesn't apply in Kentucky, he said. No, she said, but Kentucky Revised Statutes Chapter 286 does. The interest rate reclassification on your loan required written disclosure and a 60-day cure period under the terms of the original acquisition agreement. Consolidated skipped that step. They may not know you know that. He stood on the road in the October cold and didn't say anything. I'm calling to let you know, she said. What you do with it is your business. The line went quiet. She did not call back. He did not call her. That evening he drove to Lexington. He sat across from a different attorney than the housing counselor had referred, one he'd found by reading Bar Association records for 2 hours the night before, a woman who specialized in predatory lending and who had, he noticed, filed against Consolidated Appalachian Lending twice in the last 18 months. Her name was Roth, and she listened to everything he said, and then she looked at the loan documents for 17 minutes without speaking. They skipped the disclosure step, she said. That's what I was told. She looked at him. By who? He put the folded piece of paper on her desk, the one he'd written the name on after the call. Sarah Voss. She looked at it and then back at him, and she said the name the way people said it when they were confirming something they'd already suspected. She told you to call me? Roth asked. She told me what to look for, he said. I found you myself. Roth looked at him for a moment, and then she opened a yellow legal pad and uncapped a pen. Sala left the hospital on the 10th day. She left on crutches with a follow-up scheduled at a Lexington orthopedic practice and a bag that Priya had packed for her. She did not go to Louisville, which was where her offices were. She told Priya she'd be working remotely for 2 weeks, which was not unusual, and she settled into a rental house in Corbin with a ground-floor bedroom and a porch and a good internet connection. She did not tell Priya she had started reading everything she could find about Consolidated Appalachian Lending's lending practices in rural Kentucky, or that she had requested the KL prospectus documents through a proxy firm in Cincinnati, or that she had placed a call to a contact at a regional bank advisory group she'd worked with 4 years earlier in a completely different context. Sawyer was not, by nature, someone who explained her process. She had learned that people made better decisions when they weren't watching the decision being made. What she was doing, in the evenings on the porch in Corbin, while the October nights went cold around the ridgeline, was reading the profile of a man who had spent 8 years doing work that mattered, and then watched the specific output of that work get set aside by people who found it inconvenient, who had then spent the following 5 years doing the smaller version of the same work in a county road crew truck, doing it precisely, doing it without complaint, apparently without bitterness, and who had, on the afternoon of a flash flood, crossed 40 feet of moving water to pull a stranger out of a culvert that he had told someone years ago was going to fail. She was not sentimental. She also knew when a pattern was worth paying attention to. On a Friday in late October, Declan picked Theo up from school and they drove back to Sycamore Fork Road together. Theo sat in the passenger seat the way he always did, one knee up, looking out the window at the ridgelines with the steady interest of a child who had not yet learned to perform disinterest. Owen's mom said your picture was in the county paper, Theo said. There was an incident report. She said you saved somebody. Declan drove for a moment. I helped somebody out of a difficult situation. Theo looked at him the way he sometimes did, with an assessment that was neither doubt nor confirmation. He picked up his backpack from the floor and held it on his lap. Is the house okay? He said. Declan watched the road. What do you mean? There's a letter on the table when I come home, Theo said. The same logo every time. You put them in the drawer. Declan was quiet. He had underestimated again the particular attention of an 8-year-old who had learned to notice things he wasn't meant to. We're working on it, Declan said. Theo considered this. He nodded with the slow nod of someone who wasn't satisfied but had decided not to press it. He was, in this way, unusually like his father. He put the backpack on the floor again and went back to watching the ridgelines. That night, they made chili from the recipe Claudine had written in the back of a yellow legal pad that Declan kept in the cabinet next to the stove. Theo stirred it without being asked. They ate at the kitchen table with the window open because Theo liked the sound of the creek, and afterward Theo did homework while Declan sat at the other end of the table and read through the notes he'd taken at Roth's office. He had not told Theo about the attorney. He was not going to, not until there was something to tell. 3 weeks after Sarah made her first call to Declan, she made a second one. He was in the truck, parked outside Alvy's supply depot, waiting for a parts order. "You didn't call back," she said. "I found the attorney you weren't suggesting," he said. A pause. "Roth. She's filed against Consolidated twice." "3 times, Saw said. The third is pending." He leaned back against the headrest. "You knew about her before you called me." "I knew there were options." She said it evenly, not apologizing for the indirection. "I didn't want to hand you a solution. I wanted to give you the part that was missing." He thought about that. He was not sure he liked it. He was also not sure she was wrong. "What are you doing with the bank?" he said. "A beat. 2. Looking at it." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I have right now." The parts order came out. Alvy's guy set it on the tailgate and waved. Declan raised a hand. "Your leg," he said. "Healing, non-weight bearing for 4 more weeks. That's a long time to be still." "I don't sit still," she said. "I just sit." He almost smiled at that. He didn't say so. Consolidated Appalachian Lending's board of directors received a formal acquisition inquiry on a Monday morning in the first week of November. It came to a Louisville advisory firm and identified the acquiring entity as Voss Capital Partners, a regional investment group out of Louisville with holdings in commercial banking, infrastructure lending, and rural development finance. The inquiry included a valuation analysis, a clean balance sheet breakdown, and a proposed timeline of 60 days. The board chair, a man named Purcell, called an emergency session that same afternoon. By Wednesday, the bank's general counsel had identified the inquiry as genuine. The valuation is fair, and the timeline as aggressive, but legally achievable. On Thursday, the branch manager of the Harlan County office, a man named Glenn, who had been at the bank for 11 years, and who had processed 5 of the 11 corridor acceleration notices himself, received a call from his regional supervisor telling him that all pending enforcement actions in the Sycamore Fort corridor were to be paused pending portfolio review. Glenn paused them. He didn't ask why. He had learned over 11 years that the reasons usually came later and were usually financial, and that the practical effect of asking was mostly that people told you things you then had to decide what to do with. Declan learned about the acquisition through Roth, who had gotten a call from a housing advocacy contact in Lexington who had seen the regional banking authority notice. Roth called Declan on a Wednesday evening when he was in the backyard splitting wood for the winter. "Voss Capital Partners," Roth said. "Ring any bells?" He stood with the axe in his hand and looked at the ridgeline for a moment. "It might," he said. "The acquisition is real. 60-day timeline. Clean portfolio on the consumer side." She paused. "If this goes through, the acceleration notices probably don't survive the portfolio review." "Probably. In my professional opinion, they definitely don't survive it, but I'm not certain, and I don't like telling clients things I'm not certain about." "I appreciate that," he said. He set the axe against the wood pile. He looked at his phone for a while after Roth hung up. Then he dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. "You're buying the bank," he said. "The process is underway." "For the corridor properties." "For several reasons." "I didn't ask you to do this." "No," she said, "you didn't." A beat. The Sully Creek culvert network failed because someone filed a maintenance specification objection that got set aside for cost reasons. 3 people were hospitalized in October's flood events alone. 2 of those culverts are still operating at the original 2018 spec. I forwarded the course internal records and your original technical objection to the Army Inspector General and to 2 members of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. He didn't say anything. "I did that before the acquisition inquiry," she said, separately. "I'm telling you now because you have a right to know. You should have asked me." I know, she said. I made a decision about whether to. A pause that was honest rather than evasive. I decided wrong. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. Not comfortable, but not hostile either. The sound of something being assessed. What happens next? He said. With the culverts, probably an inspector general review and a core response within 90 days. With the bank, the acquisition closes in 60 days pending board vote. With your mortgage, the restructuring terms should be confirmed in writing within 30 days of closing. And the other 10 properties. All 11 simultaneously under a single policy review. No individual carve-outs, no visible connection to your situation specifically. Her voice was steady. It's a portfolio-wide corrective measure. He sat down on the woodpile. The ridge had gone dark, just the outline of the white oaks against the sky, and the creek down in the hollow was running quiet. This isn't about the culvert, he said. It's partly about the culvert. Sarah. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was the same, even, precise. But there was something underneath it that she hadn't tried to put there and hadn't tried to hide. No, she said, not entirely. He looked at the dark ridge for a while. You should probably come and say that in person, he said. Another pause, shorter. I have 4 more weeks, non-weight-bearing. I know what non-weight-bearing means, he said. It doesn't mean can't travel. She came on a Saturday in the second week of November. Priya had wanted to drive her, but Sarah had rented a car with hand controls and driven herself the 61 miles without difficulty, which was the kind of thing she did that made Priya occasionally reconsider her employment situation. The house on Sycamore Fork Road was a white 3-bedroom with a covered porch and 2 old oaks in the front yard. She had not been given an address. She had looked it up because it was public record and because she was the kind of person who looked things up. Declan opened the door before she got to the porch steps. He looked different from the footage. Taller, or maybe it was the context. The county road behind him on the security camera had been wide and disorienting. He was watching her manage the crutches across the gravel drive with the specific expression of someone who wanted to help and had correctly calculated that helping would not be welcome. You drove, he said. Hand controls, she said. He stepped back from the door. She went in. The house was what she'd expected. Clean, not neat, the functional order of someone who had organized things according to use rather than appearance. A child's jacket on a hook by the door. A yellow legal pad on the kitchen counter with handwriting she recognized as a recipe from the way the amounts were written. At the kitchen table, a boy looked up from a drawing he was working on. He was 8, she knew. He had his father's steadiness, that specific quality of stillness that wasn't passivity. And he looked at her crutches with the practical interest of a child assessing a mechanical object. Those are Lofstrand crutches, he said, the ones with the arm cuff. They are, she said. They're better for long distances. He went back to his drawing with the decisive manner of someone who had contributed the relevant information and was now finished. Declan looked at his son with the quiet expression of a man who had stopped being surprised by him. She spread the documents on the kitchen table. Declan stood across and read them without touching them, his eyes moving the way she'd come to expect, looking for the load-bearing part first. The acquisition structure. The portfolio review policy. The timeline. He straightened up. They'll fight the restructuring on accounts 4 and 7, he said. The original loan terms have a superseding clause that the acquisition agreement doesn't address directly. She looked at him. She had not noticed that. She pulled the relevant page toward her and read it. He was right. I'll flag it to the advisory team, she said. He nodded. He walked to the window and looked at the ridge. You didn't come here to show me these. I came because you told me to. I told you to say something in person. She looked at the documents on the table. Then she looked at him. He was still watching the ridge, the white oaks, the last of the November light lying flat across the hollow. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. It was the most honest thing she'd said to him, and she said it the way she said most honest things, plainly, without softening it. He turned from the window. He looked at her the way he hadn't in the culvert or on the phone, directly, taking his time. You pulled me out of a drainage ditch in a flash flood, she said. You were in it, he said. You went back in, after you'd already gotten clear. He shrugged, not dismissive, more the shrug of a person for whom the action and the reason are the same thing. There was still someone in it. Theo came in from the back of the house with a dog-eared field guide he'd found somewhere, wanting to confirm whether the bird he'd seen on the fence post that morning was a Carolina wren or a house wren. Declan identified it from the description without looking at the book, and Theo went back out with the satisfied expression of someone whose theory had been confirmed. Sarah watched the back door close. "He's good," she said. "He's better than good." Declan said it the way parents said things that were simply true. "He's been patient with me for 2 years." She understood what that meant. She didn't say so. "I'm going to stay in Corbin another 2 weeks," she said, "while the acquisition closes." He looked at her. "There's no operational reason I need to be in Corbin," she said. He was quiet. Through the window, the ridge had dawned the amber of late afternoon, the oaks catching the last of the horizontal light. "I make chili on Fridays," he said. "My wife's recipe. Theo does the stirring." She looked at him. He was looking at the ridge again, but his posture had shifted, the way a building shifts when the load redistributes. "There's usually enough left over," he said. She looked at the table, at the acquisition documents, at the yellow legal pad on the counter with the recipe in someone else's handwriting, at the door through which a boy with a field guide had gone out to check on a bird. "Okay," she said. Boss Capital Partners completed the acquisition of Consolidated Appalachian Lending in 54 days. The Regional Banking Authority noted the timeline as unusually fast. Priya noted it as the result of approximately 200 hours of work in 6 weeks, which she tracked in a spreadsheet she did not share with anyone. The portfolio review policy was announced on the Monday following the closing. 11 accounts in the Sycamore Fork corridor were included in the restructuring. The terms were set by a 3-person panel selected from the bank's new community lending board, and they were applied uniformly, without reference to any individual borrower's situation. Declan received the confirmation letter on a Wednesday. He read it at the kitchen table, set it down, and stood up to check on the pan of water he had going for pasta. Theo came home at 3:15, dropped his backpack, and picked up the letter from the table. He read the first paragraph. He set it down. He looked at his father's back, at the way he was standing at the stove. Then he picked up his backpack and carried it to his room and started his homework without saying anything, because some things you understood the shape of before you understood the words, and this was one of them. That evening, after dinner, Theo did the dishes while Declan dried. They had this system, had had it since Claudine died, and it was one of the routines that had held through everything. The shape of it. 2 people working through a task side by side in a kitchen that smelled like dish soap and whatever they'd eaten. "Are we okay?" Theo said. He was drying a bowl. He did not look up from it. "Yeah," Declan said. "We are." Theo put the bowl on the stack. He handed over the next one. He nodded, once, the slow nod that meant he had taken in what he'd been told, and was filing it as fact. The Inspector General's review of the 2018 Sully Creek Covert Network specifications was opened in December. The Corps of Engineers' response was expected by spring. Roth had referred Declan to a federal contractor attorney in Lexington who was reviewing the documentation and who had used the phrase material liability exposure in their first meeting and then carefully unpacked what that meant. Saw did not attend the bank's press availability in Louisville. She was in Harlan County, which was not a thing she had planned, and then was. She drove herself, which Priya had long since stopped commenting on. She parked on the street and looked at the house for a moment before she got out. The white siding, the covered porch, the 2 oaks, the ridge beyond them going bare in the December cold, all the leaves down now, the structure of things visible. Theo was on the porch when she got to the steps, bundled in a coat, working on something with a pocket knife and a piece of soft pine. He looked up. "He's out back," he said. Then, with the decisiveness of someone making an announcement, "I told him you'd probably come." She stopped on the second step. "You did?" "Your rental car has Louisville plates," he said, "same as last time." He went back to his carving. "He said you couldn't have known, but I knew." She looked at the piece of pine in his hands. A rough bird shape, the head forming. "What kind?" "Chickadee," he said. "The wings hard." She went around to the back. Declan was at the railing of the back porch, looking at the valley below. The Cumberlands on the far side, the hollow beneath. the creek running low and clear in December. He heard her crutches on the boards and turned. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had not quite let himself believe something until the moment it arrived. On the porch table was a set of drawings, pencil on paper, the kind of clean technical hand that engineering training gives you and time keeps sharp. A floor plan she recognized as this house, but changed. The back porch extended, wider than it was now. A second door from the kitchen. She looked at the drawings, then at him. "You're adding to the porch," she said. "It's a good porch," he said. "Could be better." She looked at the valley. The Cumberlands were gray-blue in the December light, and the hollow below the ridge had a particular cold clarity to it. Everything stripped back and visible. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She reached for it without thinking, saw Priya's name on the screen. She looked at it for 2 full seconds. She turned the screen off and put the phone in her pocket. Declan had seen. He looked away, back toward the valley. She stood beside him at the railing. The cold was steady and the air smelled like creek water and cut wood and nothing in particular of a December afternoon in eastern Kentucky. "I don't know how to do this part," she said. "What part?" "The part that's not a transaction." He was quiet. "Then you're doing it right now." She didn't answer that. She looked at the ridge. After a while, the back door opened and Theo came through with 2 mugs and a smaller one for himself. He set the 2 large ones on the railing without being asked, picked up his own, and settled into one of the porch chairs with the pocket knife and the chickadee. He did not explain why he'd made 3. Nobody asked. Glenn at the Harlan County branch submitted his resignation from Consolidated Appalachian Lending's successor institution in January. He said it was for personal reasons, which was technically true. The new management accepted it without comment and posted the position internally. The following week, the Louisville Courier-Journal published a brief item noting that the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions had begun an inquiry into the lending patterns of Consolidated Appalachian Lending's rural corridor accounts in the period between 2021 and 2024. The inquiry cited a pattern of acceleration clause use statistically correlated with properties in zones under active commercial development review. No individual branch personnel were named. The institution's prior lending structure was. Declan read the item on his phone in the truck before his shift, in the parking lot of the county depot. He put his phone away and started the engine and went to work. The restructuring confirmation came in writing, and with it the adjusted terms, and with those the number that meant the house on Sycamore Fork Road was still his, in a way that didn't require managing. He folded the letter and put it on the counter, and did not put it in the drawer with the others. That evening, after Thea was in bed, he called Sarah. It was 9 at night. She was in Louisville, back in the office full-time now, her leg healed clean. He had spoken to her 7 times since December, which he was aware of, though he had not told anyone the number. "The letter came," he said. "I know," she said. "Priya tracks the confirmation schedule." He looked at the kitchen, the yellow legal pad, the woodpile through the window, stacked high for winter. "I didn't thank you," he said. "I know. I'm not going to." She was quiet. Then, "Okay. I'm going to ask you something instead." He heard her adjust, the small sound of someone shifting position. He could not have said why that was audible to him, but it was. "There's a restaurant in Harlan," he said. "It's not a good restaurant. The booth seats are uncomfortable and the coffee is gas station quality and it closes at 8. I'm going to be there at 6 on Saturday. Theo is with my mother." A pause, longer than usual. "That's not a question," she said. "No," he said, "it's not." The pause stretched another beat. He waited. "I'll need the address," she said. He gave it to her. They talked for another 23 minutes, not about the bank or the culvert or the NTSB review or any of the specific things that had been, until recently, the structure that held their conversations up. He couldn't have reconstructed the 23 minutes in detail afterward. He wasn't sure that was the point. After the call, he went out to the back porch in the January cold. He stood at the railing and looked at the valley, at the Cumberlands in the dark, at the hollow below where the creek was running under the ice. On the porch table, the drawings he'd made in November were still there, weighted with a flat stone against the winter wind. He picked up the pencil that had been there since December. He looked at the extended porch, The new door from the kitchen, and then at the corner of the drawing where there was room to add something else. A small covered section on the south end, out of the wind, where the morning light would be good, and where a person could sit and work if they were the kind of person who didn't sit still but sometimes just sat. He pulled the paper flat and began to draw. I keep thinking about the moment Declan let go of the bridge support. He had already made it. He was holding on, water at his chest, cold enough to shut a person down from the inside out, and he heard something from the culvert, a sound that could have been nothing. He let go anyway and moved toward it. That's the part that stays with me, not the rescue itself, but the decision that happened before it. The one nobody saw, the one that didn't come with any promise of outcome. He didn't know if someone was in there, he just knew he hadn't checked. I think about the kind of person it takes to make that move. Not brave in a loud way. Brave in the way that's almost boring to watch from the outside. A man doing a thing because the alternative is leaving someone behind, and that's simply not a category he operates in. That's not a personality trait you wake up with. It's something you build, slowly, by making smaller versions of the same choice over and over until it becomes the only way you know how to be. Declan had spent 8 years at the Corps of Engineers doing the same thing in a different form. He ran the numbers, saw what the culvert specifications would mean under a heavy rain event, and filed the objection. He didn't do it because it was easy or because someone asked him to. He did it because the alternative was staying quiet about something that was going to hurt people. When the objection was overruled, he left. He didn't make a scene. He didn't go to the press. He just refused to put his name on work he knew was wrong, and he walked away from a career he'd spent a decade building. That kind of integrity is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It costs things. And then there's Sarah. I used to think the most useful thing a capable person could do was act fast and act alone. Sarah does act fast. 54 days to close a bank acquisition is not a thing that happens without someone running on very little sleep and a very clear sense of direction. But what I noticed, watching how she moved through this, is that she kept stopping to ask whether what she was doing was right, not just effective. Right. There's a scene where she apologizes to Declan for acting without his permission. Even though what she did was good, she knew the distinction mattered. That kind of thinking, the kind that slows you down just long enough to check your own reasoning, is rarer than speed, rarer than resources. It's what separates someone who does powerful things from someone who does the right powerful things. And Theo, 8 years old, tracking the logo on the letters in the kitchen drawer, identifying Sarah's Louisville plates on a second visit without being told to pay attention. There's something in a child who grows up watching a parent hold a hard line quietly, who sees what it costs and chooses to understand it rather than resent it. Theo didn't have language for what his father had been carrying. He had something better, patience, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't need to be explained. The flood happened because a culvert was built to the wrong specification. Declan knew that before it happened and couldn't stop it. He saved someone anyway with the same knowledge that had failed him institutionally, applied now in the most direct way possible. His hands, his body, 40 feet of moving water. What came back to him wasn't justice in any tidy sense. It was something more like consequence. When you spend years doing careful, honest work, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates somewhere. It shows up in how you move through a crisis, in what you notice, in who decides you're worth showing up for. I don't think Declan would say any of this about himself. I don't think he thinks in those terms. He'd say he did what the situation required, and then he went back to work. Maybe that's the whole thing right there.